the legal services program was established at the law school, by the law school. Just because the politics of the state were so very conservative. And this is a program that was running against the tide. It was unpopular. The program was unpopular politically and otherwise with many, many people.
Dean Josh Morris has been mentioned many times as the person who brought these, quote, Yale graduates to teach at the University of Mississippi School of Law when he was the dean. And the program at the University of Mississippi School Law School gave birth to North Mississippi Rural Legal Services.
A program that was really funded as a clinical program to the law school. So it had sort of a committee that ran it. Michael Trister was the nominal director at the time, and the person most influential probably on my career. Michael was, he was probably a couple of years older than I was as a professor and I as a student. So we were able to be friends and social friends as well as a student and professor. And he, we did a lot of disruptive kind of litigation. We didn't seem to be fall into the mold of just doing divorces and adoptions, and so it really created a great deal of dissension with the bar and the politicians of Mississippi, and Michael and his colleague George Strickler, who was also on the faculty and who were running the clinical program at North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, were fired from the faculty, and they sued the law school for firing them, and ultimately got reinstated into the position and on the faculty.
The only thing that really got everybody upset was when I decided after 4 years on the Hill at McDaniel, Western Maryland College, going through all the situations that I went through, that I was ready for the big leagues of racism. I wanted to go to Mississippi.
When I graduated in '72, I was the valedictorian of my class. The school had only been integrated or desegregated for about 18 months. There was a lot of anger. I graduated from Grenada High School in Grenada County, and there was a lot of anger over that. And when graduation night comes, everyone is going to have a good time. You're going to graduate. You're going to be very happy. You're going into a new chapter of your life. I had to give the speech as a valedictorian. I had to have a police escort to graduation. The police came, and when I said escort, I rode in a police car. And they waited there until the ceremony was over, and when it finished, they put me back in the car and they drove me home, and basically suggested that I might want to stay at home and not go out because they had some fear for my safety.
Actually, a lynch party that came to get me. My father had already gone out in Chicago, and my mother, my father, before he left, was building a hole in the underground of the house to try to put a bathroom in the house. And my mother had me, when they came for me, they had me to go down and get down in the house in that hole. They covered me up that way, and then they looked for me and they come to They had a lunch party. They had a truck. They had people on the truck and they had some dogs. So mother put me in that truck there. So I got in the truck, and then after no, I'm stayed under the ground. Then they went away, and mother was trying to find some way to get me out of town because they were coming back to me. And my sister, and then about an hour later, she was trying to get people to connect with the students. And my sister was outside. She saw the truck. She said, "Here come the shaft now with the dogs on there." So they had to come in, a group of people on there with the guns and stuff. They came in. What I did was I went outside and we had an outdoor toilet that was full. I was building another hole to remove to do another toilet on there, so it didn't. What I did was I got into the toilet, same there, and the dogs came out. The dogs came to the house, and they tried to get in there, kick it up the door. But the stench was so strong that it was bothering them, so they tried to get those dogs away from there. I was saying that saved me. And then they finally left. When they left, I finally they got some people took me over and took me out to the woods and washed me. Then my aunt had come, lived in Chicago. She came down for holiday when my family was home. That same night she came down, and what she did, they finally got me. They took me I went to my grandfather's house who lived in the country from us. She came by that next morning, picked me up, and drove me all the way. I put me in the trunk of the car until I got to Kentucky, and then went along to Chicago. That's how I ended up in Chicago.
We had what was called the Southern Mobilization Project, and it was designed to send students to the South and to organizations that had a reputation for addressing poverty as well as issues affecting racial minorities. So I assigned myself to North Mississippi Rural Legal Service for 2 summers. That was in summer of '75 and the summer of '76, and I finished law school in '77. And it was a tremendous experience.
My last day in that first summer in Mississippi, we went to Mound Bayou, which I had never heard of before when I first came to Mississippi, but I kept hearing stories about it over and over and over again. And Mound Bayou, at the time, was the largest town and the oldest town founded by formerly enslaved people in the United States. And it's a marvelous story of how they managed to get a government charter, a state charter, and managed to put together a colony of 600 folk back in, I guess it had been 1887, to formulate their own community and succeed in giving it and keeping it alive. The speaker for Founders Day was Larry Giard, and I was introduced to him as this crazy kid from Baltimore who wanted to come back to Mississippi to stay. And a lot of people didn't believe it was possible because the former tour of duty, if you will, in Mississippi was you would come down and spend enough time to, learn a little bit about the state, and then go write your book and leave. And a lot of people didn't feel that. They didn't care for it. And so you were constantly told, when are you leaving to write your book? That kind of thing. And it wasn't my intent to do that. And I had to demonstrate that I was worth their time because I wasn't here to learn how to write a book and then to write about my experiences. I felt that my duty was to become a part of the community, live in the community, and learn from them, learn from all of them. I never wanted to be poor, but I wanted to be led by the poor. And I really felt that I had that opportunity, and going to law school was the first step in that direction. They set forth the path. They told me who to talk to. At Rutgers, I talked to them. Larry Giard, I talked to them. Next thing I know, I'm in law school.
Legal Services came in. It was on Johnson Street here with Applin Chambers and 2 or 3 more. And then Lou Mize was up at Oxford. He was kind of the director. And then Solomon Osborne came, and then Willie Perkin and Alex Sanders and all of those.
Lou was the personification of a social activist, a person who never rested, and he spoke quickly. He's from Houston, and that's still South in many ways, Southwest, but he spoke rapidly, and he was very intuitively thoughtful about what was transpiring in his immediate surroundings as well as the world. He had a global perspective about advocacy, a global perspective about what we as a race should be doing. And he was a catalyst. He would plan a dynamite to blow things up to get people to think his way. I did observe him in court. I did observe him in a deposition. I remember Lou, I think it was in Holly Springs. We were going to a deposition. He took me along with him. I was in law school still. And as he walked in, the opposing counsel, who were white, counsel were white, he said, "Oh my God, we're gonna be here all day," because Lou was very thorough. He was an excellent advocate, and he was a true personification of what a legal aid lawyer should be, or even a civil rights lawyer to be, which he eventually, after he left legal services, he became.
When a woman has heard that there's a lawyer in Mound Bayou who can help her with something that nobody else can help her with, and she comes in and tells you that she got fired from her job because when she was 17 years old, she had a baby out of wedlock, and you're pissed off. Ben will tell you this. I mean, it's visceral. You cannot run away from stuff like this, and I'm going to sue that son of a bitch. How? What are you supposed to do? And there's nobody there. You got to remember, we're all young lawyers. I knew who Johnny Walls was. I knew who Willie Bailey was. I knew who Tom Morris was, who were all lawyers who were at legal services. And we had all met and talked over time. But there was nobody to turn to and say, what do we do? And so I did the only thing I thought I could do. This lady explained the situation to me. And first of all, I'm in stunned shock because I can't believe it. Who would do that to somebody? And then after you overcome the anger, and I was really angry in those days, you got to figure out how to figure out the problem. And you learn how to do what the civil rights workers call do something with nothing often and win. And I called and I asked the clerk of the court, how do I file a suit? All my life, I've gone to men or women, and how do I do it? And I kind of got a reputation around the Delta for doing that. I would call up somebody, and say, look, how do I do this? And they would actually sit down and explain it to me. And so I got great advice and counsel from a lot of people just because they were curious that this young Black lawyer from Baltimore would come down here and he wants to file a lawsuit. And he asked me how. They send you books, that lawyers never read and stuff. I can't find a law library. Tom Morris told me the law library was upstairs on the second floor of the Bolivar County Courthouse next to the jail. If you talk to the sheriff, he'll let you in. It was little stuff like that that I guess in one sense endeared me to people. Even white people who couldn't believe I was that stupid, right? We figured out that the defendants had listed a witness who we found was the expert in Brown versus Board of Education for the school board. And I had an idea, just came out of nowhere. Damn, if they can get the expert for the school board, why can't we get the expert that Thurgood Marshall used? And we called him, and I'm blanking on his name, it'll come back to me. We called him, and he said yes, he would testify. Well, that led to a whole bunch of people falling into the case who all volunteered their time. They all gave it up. And we didn't have a single woman. I thought that was so stupid. There was no woman who was going to testify, yet women would be the most adversely affected people by the operation of a rule that says that, if you're pregnant and you choose to have your child, you can't work ever again. We're going to bar you from working. And so we're having a fight among the young lawyers. We've just learned what, an expert is now. And, we got to find one. And somebody said in the room, it's me, Willie, and Johnny. And I don't know who said it. I wish I could remember exactly what, but somebody said, if we had Fannie Lou Hamer, we could make this happen. We win this case. And somebody said, but Vic, she only has a third grade education. I don't give a shit. If we could get Fannie Lou Hamer, we would make it happen, right? So I called Stavis and told him, I got an idea. We want to call Fannie Lou Hamer as an expert. You know what he says to me? But she's only got a 30th grade education. How's she going to testify? I don't care. She's the most articulate person I've ever heard in my life. And she was legendary at that time. And so the one thing that came out of the case that I've always been proud of is I was a lawyer that called Fannie Lou Hamer as an expert to testify against some of the most brilliant minds in the right on an issue involving women's rights. And the fun part is Judge Katie listened to her testimony and agreed that she was an expert. It was spectacular. And the long and short of it is that the case that nobody thought we could win, the case that we got threats over, the very first case that I ever did, and did it with an all-black team of young lawyers, not a single one of them had any more experience than me. Matter of fact, I was the least experienced of all of them. And none of us had been more experienced than 3 years. And we faced the Attorney General of the state of Mississippi, and we faced the son-in-law, Senator Eastland, and the finest firms in Mississippi, and we won. Not just before Katie, not just before the Fifth Circuit, but in the United States Supreme Court in the case that I argued. It's a very, very important moment for me personally.
I graduated in May of 1980. And so at that time, legal services was, as I said, considered a training ground for young black lawyers. There were not as many opportunities to go into the legal field in different areas as there are now. So it was good to go to legal services, to be around older lawyers who were doing significant litigation.
The only black lawyer that I ever saw was Alex Sanders. And Alex was worked with legal service, was one of the executive directors, and he started the legal service program, office here in Greenwood.
The most important thing that the legal services program did in its early days was to employ black lawyers, black law students coming out of law school, becoming lawyers, getting a little bit of training. I mean, certainly I wasn't experienced, but I had a couple of years on some of those guys, and I could give them the benefit of what I'd learned. And so then they could, after a while, go off and open their own practice and become role models. And some of them are now judges,
The kind of tenacity and the kind of practice that the legal services brought about, they made the good old boys get off the seat. See, they were making deals. They didn't really practice law the way they do now. But when those young guys came out and did what they did, that changed everybody.
I think that they felt, when I say they, I mean the community, I think felt that we were a resource and that we could be trusted, and that if they had a problem and they came to us, I mean, everything was not about filing a lawsuit. It wasn't. Sometimes it was a brief service, sometimes it was a phone call, but they felt that we were someone that they could come to, that they could trust, and that if it were possible, we were going to get the job done for them.
Well, the Rural Legal Service did a great service to the community, and so actually a lot of people had not been able to afford. Most lawyers didn't want to take cases like, and people didn't have any money, they weren't going to work with. And so, I don't care whether it was divorce, whether it was foreclosures, whether it was gun insurance, all this kind of stuff. And Skip knew a lot of people because he did a lot of billing. People knew him all over the place. And so they went to Skip before they went to the legal service. And so Skip would send them on, go up there and talk to Luke, they can help you out. And so I think Skip directed a lot of people to Rural Legal Service, so you can get some help. Just go in and tell them I told you.
So legal services initially was connected pretty closely to community problems such as school integration, school desegregation, voter registration.
Right about the time we were opening our office in Holly Springs, and we're getting to know and work with some of the leadership of the community organization up there. There was an election, and for the first time there were black candidates running for various local offices. Skip Robinson ran for county sheriff, and Quintel Robinson ran for I think superintendent of education, and other people were running for supervisor and so on. And I don't think they want anything except some very small district-wide, didn't win any county-wide positions, but it was really a first major step in that county. And one of the issues that the African-American candidates were running on had to do with the fact that the Board of Supervisors had decided to discontinue the food stamp program. At that point in time, food stamps was optional on a countywide basis, and if you didn't have that, they had what was called the Commodities Distribution Program for poor people, which took old commodities and distributed them. But food stamps was much more popular because people could go to the regular stores and spend the food stamps and get regular food and so on. And so it was very, very desirable, and they were quite unhappy that the board had decided to discontinue the program. And so that became kind of a rallying cry for these candidates and within the community. And of course, I remember very well a meeting that took place at a church right after the election was over, maybe a few weeks after the election was over, and the organization was very energized and wanted to sort of think about where to go from there and what are we going to do next, sort of thing. And they were disappointed they had lost these elections, but they had registered a lot of voters. A lot of people had voted for the first time, and so there was a lot of good spirit. And we were at this meeting, and Skip Robinson, who was chairing the meeting, turned to me and said, "Well, what can we do about this food stamp thing next?" And because that had been such an issue that had attracted support. And I looked at him and I said, "Well, tell everybody we're gonna have a petition, and we're gonna get it on the ballot. We're gonna petition to have a vote in this county on whether there should be a food stamp program." And he said, "That's great." And so he announced that we're gonna have a petition drive and everything else. And I had no idea actually whether in Mississippi you could have a petition drive like that at the time. But it seemed like a really good idea, and I always felt that was just giving that response was one of the best pieces of legal advice I ever gave a client, because it allowed them to continue to have an organizing effort around this issue that they were working on, and people felt so strongly about it they didn't have to just sort of go away and forget about it. They could keep doing it. And I went back and dug out the law books to make sure I hadn't misspoken and made sure that we could do that. And then I drafted up some petitions that I thought complied with the local requirements, and they petitioned that. They got people to sign, and they got enough people to sign on these petitions. And of course, when they presented them, the Board of Supervisors rejected the whole thing and wouldn't do it anyway. And then we had to file suit at that point. And John Maxey was then the lawyer in Holly Springs. He had come by then in 1968, and he took over this case and filed a case, and ultimately it went to the Mississippi Supreme Court, and they ruled that we were right, that they should have had a petition, they should have had a ballot, an election on this, and so on. By that time, I think the county had come around and was in the food stamp program anyway. But I use that example when I teach sometimes, and when I talk to groups about how the role that lawyers can play, and it's not just being able to go into court and to make your arguments and argue your case, but that part of being a lawyer in that kind of in a movement really is to support what's going on, and I really have always been proud of that very quick answer I gave off the top of my head, because it was it allowed them to keep working and to keep building this organization, and it ultimately they did elect candidates in the county and so on, and having this. You can't just build a movement, you have to have issues that people care about, and this allowed people to continue working about it. So that's always been one of my favorite situations.
I remember one time talking to a lawyer somewhere on the street, and was trying to make fun of legal services work in the Ayers case, the college desegregation case. And I just looked at him, I said, well, they won the case in the United States Supreme Court. So I don't think there's a whole lot else to say about it.
To me, they're all important, okay? They're important to that person. And what you're doing, that's that person's case. So the importance of it to them is what matters. I'll give you, for instance, now, for instance, we may think guardianship is just a simple little guardianship. But there was an instance where I did a guardianship for a grandmother, and on the surface, but this was a grandmother. This was a woman whose daughter died in the hospital, had a baby. The hospital wouldn't give her the baby, okay, because so for somebody else, that may look like, that's a little guardianship. No, that was more important. It was important that this family bring this child back to the family so it could be around its blood.
North Mississippi Rural Legal Services played significant roles in, I'd say, 2 or 3 major areas. Of course, I think the first one is in litigation, the significant litigation that it was involved in. That was a role that during that time they handled cases that private attorneys were not handling.
We got schools desegregated, things integrated, so that's monumental. Those things were not happening. Regardless of Brown versus Board of Education, those things were not happening in a lot of these rural areas.
By 1968, this was 14 years after Brown versus Board of Education, but in Brown, the Supreme Court had said that schools should be integrated with all deliberate speed or something like that, and that was an invitation to school districts to really go very, very slow or to do nothing. And so there were various efforts by the school systems to avoid integrating in various ways. One was what they called freedom of choice, that parents had a choice as to where to send their kids, but given all the pressures in the community, if a black family decided to send their child to a formerly all-white school, there was enormous. They could lose their job. There could be threats. And of course, the kids would have been under tremendous pressure. So the freedom of choice approach really never worked. But it took quite a number of years of litigation to get the courts to really go beyond that and to say that if a freedom of choice plan wasn't working, then something else had to be done. Something had to be tried that was different. By the late 60s, 1968, thereabouts, there were very few school systems that were desegregated in any serious way as a result of this. And the ones that were the ones that where either the U.S. Department of Justice had brought a lawsuit to say you're not complying with Brown and you have to do certain things and get court orders to take steps beyond what they had done before. And then the NAACP Legal Defense Fund had brought some suits. So you had, I think there were roughly 160 school districts in the state at the time, and I don't remember what the numbers were, but I'm sure my guess is it was fewer than 50 were under court orders because there just weren't the resources to bring those groups were the only ones that were bringing these cases, and so we started, and I don't know whether we had 15 or 20, but those were districts where there was no desegregation, and I think it just continued. So my guess is that the districts where there was, the only place where there would have been any serious desegregation would have been where there had been lawsuits and then further enforcement of those orders, so that they went back to court and got the courts to say, no, you're not doing enough, you've got to come up with a plan and that sort of thing. And they had to come up with different things that they could do to desegregate the school.
We set a precedent in terms of quarrels, Mildred Quarles. My Mildred Quarles case was just as famous because we went to the Fifth Circuit 10 times as the Ayers case. And, we were able to get, when we left here, we had 49 black teachers in the Oxford school system. 49. Before I left Jackson State, they filed a lawsuit, right? And the D.C. United States District Court in Washington, D.C., saying in essence, how is it that schools, grammar schools and high schools got to desegregate, and the colleges? What we gonna do about the colleges? It stuck on me because, like I said, I wanted to be just like Thurgood Marshall. And let me just say, before you get into the Ayers, because, see, we filed a lawsuit. If you want to really get to it, like I said, I was at Jackson State when I started, looking at what was happening, and of course, Ike Madison was at one of the, I think, the theological schools there in Atlanta, seminary, yeah, and we hooked up at Howard. And we would gather from 1967 to 1970, and that's when we started airing. But even though you got 20 states, 19 states in the District of Columbia at the time of Brown in 1954 had segregated system, how many cases? You had 4, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Alabama. And now Maryland 5, which means you got 14 states out of compliance with Brown and Fordyce and the District of Columbia. Every last North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, those states are still segregated. Higher education system. We filed an Ayers case, I think January the 17th, I think, 1975. That was the original filing. Sugar Ditch Alley was the poorest place in America. And so, Jet Magazine, Ebony, and, Time Magazine, and, internationally, 60 Minutes, Nightline, etc. And they tell us about, this place where the sewer is backed up. And we went up in there, man, and there was houses and that stuff stinking. And Tunica, the city of Tunica, every house was made. You had more, 7 or 8 millionaires living right there. And I said, oh no. And so we filed, this suit against Tunica, and basically we filed 5 suits in Tunica. One was at-large election. We got this, so we got back on the board, city council, and we filed. But the big one was the Sugar Ditch Alley. Mm-hmm. And as a result, they moved everybody out of Sugar Ditch Alley. Jesse Jackson came down, and we was on TV, and it was on 60 Minutes and all. And Jesse, them say Tunica was America, Ethiopia. Back then, Ethiopia had to, starve and everything. That was our case. But my point is, you have to be involved. It was many nights I didn't know whether the Ku Klux Klan will kill me or not, because I'm going to them community meetings by myself, man, and them little old funny one-way highways, and, you fall. All you got to do is push you over. But the bottom line was those people in Tunica were good people. Was on Nightline, and of course, as a result of Sugar Ditch Alley, it forced the governor to say he gonna have some revenue, and allegedly the casinos came in there to give revenue.
Seven inmates, and they professed to believe in Rastafari. Of course, if you know anything about Rastafari, they grow the dreadlocks. But oddly enough, the prison officials allowed these guys to grow these dreadlocks because they saw it as a form of humiliation towards the inmate because of the way the dreadlocks look, right? So, look at that nappy head, so-and-so, whatever they call it. So that's how they viewed it. They didn't care about their hair growing. But they did have a rule on the book about your hair can only be a certain length. So, but of course, Rastafarians don't believe in cutting their hair or combing it for that matter. So we had a lawsuit about it, and the beards too. We had a lawsuit about it, and unfortunately, we lost the lawsuit. And sure enough, no sooner we lost that lawsuit, they swamped down on those brothers like like flies on it, right? Cutting hair. And then we had also, as in relation to the beard, there was one case where that case settled, and I was amazed that the Attorney General's office decided to settle that case, because every case that we filed out of the prison, it was this one unit in the Attorney General's office that actually handled the partial penitentiary lawsuits. So it was my case, but I had to be out of town for something when we had a pretrial conference. But when I got back, I found out that they had the pretrial conference and the case had settled, and that they had used one of the program attorney that stood in for me, named Leonard McClellan. He had a beard. In fact, he had a beard from the first day I met him. They used the length of his beard as the standard to say what the length of beard should be in the penitentiary. So that was a victory on that particular case.
So legal services has just been a lifesaver to many people. We saved homes. I bet thousands of homes that were being foreclosed on. And I can't even, the number of people that needed transportation to get to work and bought these vehicles and were sold vehicles that were no good, that we were able to, either get them reliable transportation or get their money back so that they could get reliable transportation. I mean, North Mississippi Rural Legal Services it is just, you can't, it's just has provided it's just been involved in every level of relief in North Mississippi over 50 years.
If it had not been for North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, there probably would have been no access for justice on behalf of poor people and for particularly African Americans in North Mississippi.
There's always been at least in the early years, a general backlash against lawyers for poor people or people who have don't have a strong voice in the community. And there's always a reason that the powers that be can find that these folks are too loud and boisterous, they're not handling this in the right way. There's, if Alvin Chambliss just wasn't so loud, everything would be all right. But the problem was that unless somebody did speak up and be a voice for those people who did not have a significant amount of power, then there would never be any change to protect their rights. And so there was a need for people to stand up and represent these folks.
Every time they wanted someone, Sir Harvard came here. So I get emotional, forgive me, audience, but I get emotional because we were the civil rights entity, and nobody has written about us, okay? We did Marley Bar versus the City of Oxford, where we got $10 million for this school. When I filed Marley Bar, no black, maybe one, street in Oxford, one black street was paid. Everything up with dirt. All the white folks, and I tied those funds up and everything, and they paved every black street. They gave us a Olympic-sized swimming pool, and they gave us the park. We didn't have no park.
We were a lot of people's last resort, and so poor people justice when I was growing up, and even to today, are being taken advantage of, and they generally don't have they don't have the resources because of their economic status to fight these disadvantages they are facing, and legal services at that time was available.
As the Bible teaches, everybody's not going to be doctors, everybody's not going to be lawyers. He said it plain, the poor you will have with you always. And this program was set up by people to help the poor. And that's what it's supposed to do, as long as this program doors is open to help the poor. And these years I've been on the board, that's what it's been doing.
A lot of folks would have suffered and rights have been trampled over, and they wouldn't have had any redress. I think we'd have looked like third world countries, and rights have been taken over, kids been locked up, discriminated against, and we probably would not make that much, would not have made as much as progress as we have to this day.
I spent 4 years essentially with my time here in Mississippi, most of which was with North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, and I think it helped shape how I look at the law and how I have practiced law ever since. So it gave me a particular perspective and a set of interests that I think I've carried through with in my professional life since then.
For 40 years, I looked to my time at North Mississippi as being the basis for my being able to achieve what I've achieved over these past 40 years. And I treasure that, and I love that fact, and I will continue to be supportive and love y'all until my last breath.
I fully appreciate to this very day that I made the decision to come and work and to stay with North Mississippi Rural Legal Services. I simply do not believe that I would have the same understanding or the same appreciation of the law that I do now if I had not gone through that.